here in Sarasota, Florida, and I just wanted to welcome everyone here and remind people that we do have a chat. You can put your questions in there, and because we have quite a few people online for this, please mute your own mic so we don't get feedback during the session. I wanted to just say to everyone that I appreciate you coming. It's a big day, Hurricane Day here in Sarasota, Florida. We've had several of those lately, but at least this is one where we're talking about it and not having it. So that's a good thing. For those of you who may be new, you may know that the Climate Adaptation Center is a 501c3, so we're a not-for-profit organization. And what we're here to do is lower the risk from climate warming by providing education and insights for decision makers. Science knows quite a bit more than society thinks it does. And so we're here basically to fill that gap in understanding so that decision makers in all walks of life, from private individuals to people who work for companies, people who work in philanthropy, people who work in the business community and academic sectors, that we can all share this information and inform our decision making, because the rate of climate warming now is double what it was in 1990. It's kind of a shocking thing that's happening. And for us to really get through and have a bridge to the future, we're going to have to work together over the next couple of decades to make sure we don't shift from a warming climate into a climate that is irreversibly damaged. And we're getting into that very serious phase, in my opinion, now. So this is the time for education and informed action, and all of you are part of that. Just remember that sometimes we feel like we're just an individual and we can't do anything, but at the end of the day, it's all about us, because we change the world one person at a time, one organization at a time, one community at a time, one state at a time, etc. And it's infectious once it starts. So, and speaking of infectious, I want to talk to you just for a moment about the Climate Champion Awards that are coming up on April 18th, where we'll be honoring a half dozen climate champions who have been nominated by our 4,000 person strong newsletter readers, who are very familiar with our community and what people are doing. And they have nominated a series of people, and these are the 6 that the CAC has chosen from that list to be nominated formally for the Climate Champions Awards. The idea of the Climate Champions Awards is going back to individual and organizational performance, because what we're doing is honoring people who do. It's not just enough to know, we must do. And that's what Leonardo da Vinci, my favorite scientist, said some time ago. And it's so true. By inspiring this community and honoring the people who do inspire it, we're hoping to inspire more people like you who will help us make the shift from worrying about climate to doing something about it. And of course, we have a lot of impacts here in Sarasota, from hurricanes, which we're talking about today, storm surge, sea level rise, red tides, impacts on human health and on biodiversity. So here's how you get tickets for the event. We still have some left with 2 weeks to go. And we're going to have a very impressive group of people at this event. And I hope you'll consider joining us. And a special thank you to our CAC members and donors and welcome news media. We really appreciate all your support, and without you, we could not do what we do. Unfortunately, it does cost money to run every organization, even if it's a not-for-profit organization. And private donations is how we decided to fund our activity so that we are above reproach on having people who give us grants, et cetera, telling us what we might have to say or not. We're saying it just like it is, and we're letting the chips fall where they may. So I wanted to remind all of you, some of you were there and some of you were not, but if you look down on the bottom left-hand corner, this is the 2021 Florida Climate Forecast Conference that was held on November 9th, 2021 at the University of Sarasota. And like all of our conferences, it was a complete sellout. This was the chart I put up on November 9th, and there are two little things I want you to see. One is that little purple box just north of the coast of Cuba. And at that time, I said that Florida was setting up for a major hurricane strike. I didn't know exactly when it was going to hit, but I said if a storm went through that purple box, that Southwest Florida was going to have a major hurricane. And then the red box is another very sensitive place that, according to our analysis, would certainly bring hurricane force winds into Southwest Florida. And lo and behold, 10 months later, at 8 o'clock on the 27th of September in the morning, Hurricane Ian entered that purple box. And you know what happened. Landfalling near Fort Myers as a Category 4 hurricane, Hurricane Ian became the third worst hurricane in history to strike the United States. And just yesterday, I was informed by the National Hurricane Center that 20 miles off the coast of Florida, it became a Category 5 storm. So it's been reclassified as peak wind of 160 miles an hour sustained winds just before it hit the coast. So yet another Category 5 hits Florida. That's the second one since 2018. You remember, again, on the west coast, northwest coast of Florida, Hurricane Michael in 2018. And of course, then we had Hurricane Nicole, the latest landfalling hurricane in Florida in history, strike in November and also impact our area. That sort of blue cloud is the area of gale force winds. Again, another huge hurricane, this one only a Category 1, but the entire state of Florida experienced gale force winds from this storm and some very serious damage. I just wanted to show you a small video here about what it looked like in Fort Myers in this incredible video of the storm surge striking. This is a 6-hour video that's composited down into a few minutes. This is ground zero for the hurricane strike. The eye went 1/2 mile from this location. Those palm trees are 12 feet high, and notice the red house is starting to float. Soon you will see the camera, which is 12 feet high, go underwater. Notice the house now is across the street. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a 15-foot storm surge. About 80 people drowned in that storm surge. And I want to say that the storm surge was predicted to be 15 feet and actually was 15 feet. And yet 80 people drowned because they didn't understand what their elevation was. If you were in that storm and your house was 5 feet above sea level, that meant that 10 feet of water was coming, and most ceilings in houses on the first floor, especially ranch houses, are only 8 feet high. So people drown in their houses, in their garages, in their cars. This is a very important graphic. It shows the number of days between billion-dollar events, climate-caused events in the United States only between 1980 and 2020. And you can see the number of days has gone down from roughly 100 to less than 17. This is damage is adjusted for 2022 inflation. So in other words, 1980 and 2020 is the same dollars adjusted for inflation. This just shows that the climate has already changed, and we are in a different climate than we were in 1980 and 1990. Yet we have not, as human beings, acknowledged this or adjusted to it, and some big adjustments are necessary. To give you an example, the number of storms now is 14 a year versus 12 back then. And it's rising fast. Between 2017 and 2022, can you imagine 65 named storms in the Atlantic Basin in the last 5 years? I mean, actually, that is actually wrong. It's 2019 to 22, 5 named storms in the last 3 years. The number of major hurricanes are increasing. That's category 3 through 5. And we're seeing these storms that develop practically overnight into explosive category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. The other thing that's happening is that the hurricanes are moving more slowly. And when you have stronger storms and more storms moving more slowly, that's just a recipe for more death and destruction. Here's a graph that shows the number of category 5 storms in the 20-year period since satellites started in 1960 to 1980. There were 7 category 5 storms during that time and 16 category 4s. And from 2020 to 2023, there were 15 category 5s and 35 category 4s. And so you can see it's about a double in the amount of severe hurricanes that we're having. Just since 2017, there have been 6 category 4 and 5 hurricanes that have hit just the Gulf of Mexico. And the entire damage from those storms, both insured and uninsured, is about $425 billion. I mean, it's getting to be serious money, even in the United States, where we throw trillions around. But that's a lot of money. And if this trend continues, you can sort of imagine our ability to respond to this kind of a financial burden will lower with time. Hurricane Ian, as I said, was just reclassified yesterday to a Category 5 with 160-mile-an-hour sustained winds. The speed of movement was less than 10 miles an hour. That was half the normal speed. It was huge. It was twice the size of Hurricane Charlie that hit the exact same spot back in 2004. The storm surge, which you just witnessed, is something you can't really imagine until you've seen it, but 15 feet high. And there were 27 inches of rain in that storm, which created a 500-year inland flood and an epic red tide that is still going on in the Gulf of Mexico. The uptake of this is there's really not a good place to hide in these storms now. We used to be able to go inland and escape hurricane force winds and flooding, but now it's happening. Hurricane force winds are penetrating the coast further. Inland flooding is occurring a few days after storm surge on the coast. So we're going to have to learn to shelter in place and have a plan to get into safe places well before these storms strike. So the early season parameters that I look at that are the most important for what we're going to have this year are sea surface temperatures, the presence or absence of La Nina or El Nino. And when the season actually starts, there's this uplift called the Madden-Julian oscillation. By the way, Roll Madden was my office mate when I was first a visiting scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research way back in 1972. And he and his buddies came up with this science that shows that the Earth has an uplifting area where the air rises and a downlifting area where it descends, and that area moves around the Earth. And if it corresponds to the Atlantic basin where it's uplift during a hurricane event, it tends to make those hurricanes more severe. But we don't know that until the hurricanes are actually formed. This is the 2022 hurricane chart from the National Hurricane Center showing all the hurricanes. And if you will, you'll see there are three big ones that affected us. The first one was, of course, Ian. The second one was Nicole. And when I say us, I mean the East Coast of North America. You will see up in Canada where Hurricane Fiona was a Category 4, and when it hit the Canadian provinces just before Ian hit us, it did a record amount of damage, and it was the highest wind speeds ever recorded in Eastern Canada. So hurricanes are traveling much further north than they used to and maintaining their strength way north of where they used to. You can see the black little line there is where it became a non-hurricane, but it still had 120-mile-an-hour wind gusts when it hit. So the important thing is to understand how the spin in a hurricane amplifies storm surge. And this is really important when a hurricane is approaching. You see the eye in the center of the storm. If you're on the north side of the eye, the wind blows from the shoreline out to the ocean. And if you would please mute your mics because we're getting some feedback. Thank you. If you're on the north side of the eye on the west coast of Florida, you're going to have winds blowing from the Florida Peninsula out into the Gulf, and you're not going to have a storm surge in that area. But if you're on the south side that spin is coming onshore and it's blowing the hurricane force winds and way higher. It's blowing the water onto the shore. So that amplifies the storm surge. So this is the present view of the hurricane formation areas in the Atlantic, all the way from Africa into the Gulf of Mexico. And the red area, this is in degrees centigrade, this is the sea surface temperature. The red area is roughly 90 degrees, 85 degrees to 90 degree plus temperatures. And you will see that, I mean, folks, we're in April. This water is hot. And it's a beautiful picture when you see the Gulf Stream coming up off the east coast of Florida, off the shore of the Carolinas, and moving out into the Atlantic. This is what keeps Europe from freezing in the winter. But in the summertime, it becomes an important aspect of hurricane formation. In the south, all of the Caribbean and up into the Gulf of Mexico, where you see a swirl, that is the loop current in the Gulf of Mexico, which is now already in April, warmer than 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, Jesus.
Major hurricanes can form in the Gulf of Florida at temperatures 76 degrees or higher. So this is another close-up chart where I showed the loop current, and you can see this is the anomaly now. This is the red is the areas that are 5 degrees warmer than normal. So down through the Caribbean, you see some gray areas and a few little blue areas. That's normal or below normal. But in the Northern Caribbean and up into the Gulf and off the east coast of Florida and all along the west coast of Florida and the Gulf Coast, it's 5 degrees or more above normal. This is not good. This is another depiction of that hot plume in the Gulf from another perspective, but all of these sensor systems are showing the same thing. You'll see some cooler water up off the northeast coast that hasn't quite warmed up, and you can see the Gulf Stream going up. But this is an important part of the forecast. So the second part is what's happening with El Nino and La Nina. We've had a La Nina for the past 3 hurricane seasons, and we've had 65 named storms. So you can see when we're in La Nina mode, that's when the temperature in the Pacific is colder than normal. And that those red lines show La Nina temperatures and El Nino temperatures. And all of those charts moving forward from that little dot on the left-hand side are the forecast models, you know, a couple dozen of them that we have now that are forecasting what that Pacific water is going to do over the next months. On the bottom of the chart, you'll see 3-month increments. The February observation is where that dot is, and then you have February, March, and April, all the way through where I've circled August, September, October, November. That's peak hurricane season. And what you see is that Pacific water is warming up. And for much of the hurricane season, it looks like it's going to be in that area between La Nina and El Nino. In fact, just recently, NOAA has said La Nina is over, and we're now in what we call neutral territory. In neutral territory, it's still conducive to hurricane formation. And the relationship we're concerned about is when there's a La Nina, there's less wind shear with height. That is, the increase in wind as you go up from the surface up into the atmosphere, increasing with height, is wind shear. When we have strong wind shear, which we can have in El Nino events, that tends to blow the hurricanes off their center and keep the hurricanes weaker. During La Nina, where there's little wind shear in the Atlantic area, that allows storms like Ian to stack up and become more intense. So this year we have an improving situation from a hurricane standpoint. If you don't like hurricanes, which nobody in their right mind wants them, but that's something that's going to become a little bit more favorable for us as we move into peak hurricane season, but not necessarily so at the beginning of the season. So here's my forecast. And by the way, that image is Hurricane Ian just north of Cuba as it was going through an explosive development cycle. And by the way, it's the first hurricane in history that had two of those in a 48-hour period. So like last year, it's going to be about 14 storms, but I think the hurricanes will be more evenly distributed. Last year we had 14, but we had 2 months with no hurricanes because of a major dust plume from the Sahara desert that blew Saharan dust into the Atlantic in huge quantities during July and August. And there were absolutely no storms in those 2 months. But boy, did we ever make up for it afterward. So this year, I think we'll have the same number of storms, roughly the same number of hurricanes at 7, and 2 to 3 major hurricanes. That means category 3, 4, or 5. These are the names. I hope we don't get all the way to Whitney, but we're ready to go if they do. And you'll see a lot of new names there because a lot of these hurricane names have been retired because category 4 and 5 storm names are retired if they hit the coast. So there won't be an Ida and things like that. There won't be an Ian. And so I seem to be very important. This, I'm not sure how you say this, Idalia will be the I this year, and I don't know if the I's are going to have it again. I will see. So the considerations we have to think about here in our Southwest coast is that sea levels are already up 9 inches since 1950. What does that mean? That means that a hurricane that would strike us in 1950 is going to do at the same size, the same intensity, and moving the same speed, is going to do a lot more damage because we have way more population than we did in 1950, and the sea level has already risen 9 inches. And if your elevation where your home is located is 5 feet, was 5 feet above sea level in 1950, now it's only 4 feet. So that means that you have less buffer protecting you from the impacts of storm surges. So the escape from heavily populated low-lying areas is really impacted by this combination of sea level rise and more population. In most cases, the roads have not been raised exiting these heavily populated areas. So that means that the escape routes will go underwater before the hurricanes hit in certain situations. So that's why we say know your elevation. You can know that right now. And believe me, if you're at 5 or 6 feet above sea level and a category 2 hurricane is forecast for Sarasota, you better leave. You don't need anybody to tell you to leave. You just do that. And the earlier you leave, the better chance you're going to have to find shelter elsewhere. And we'll talk about things you can do. So here's the frequency of all storms in during the hurricane season. And you can see once we get to early May, we start seeing a pickup of storms, and then it really picks up in July. And peak hurricane season is early in September, around the 10th of September. And then it falls off. But look at 10/1, right? That's October. And you can see how fast it's falling off. But between the 10th and the 30th of October is a very serious time here in Sarasota. In June and May, we get hurricanes that come up from the Yucatan Peninsula, and we do the same thing in October. So don't be fooled that once we pass the peak, we're out of the woods. Our worst times really this year could be very early in the season and then in October again. The triple threat from water, as we talked about at the 2023 Florida Climate Conference ended on February 9th, is that sea level rise combined with storm surges on top of it, and then extreme precipitation that causes inland flooding. So this is a whole different world we're living in Florida than we're used to in the 1990s. We didn't have this combination going on then, but we do now. And that means sheltering in place becomes more of an option, but in place does not mean in your ranch house on a barrier island. It means close by, where you know where you're going before you're going there, and you know where you're taking your car before you're going there, so that you can evacuate and be safe before these escape routes go underwater. So I want to just talk about the damage from wind speeds alone. In a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane, that's where we reach hurricane force. But damage is not linear, it's exponential. So a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane, although it's only 25 miles an hour more of wind speed, does 10 times the damage of a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane. And an Ian-type storm does 250 times the damage of a Category 1 hurricane. So this is what's so important. A small change in wind speed has a huge impact on the damage. And don't be surprised. This really, really matters. A 10-mile difference in where that eye comes ashore means everything to the amount of damage we see from wind speed and from storm surge too. So if you're part of a local government, here's some questions for you. How is your area going to adapt to these serious changes in hurricane behavior that are being driven by a increasingly warming climate? What is the evacuation plan for citizens, given the possibly shorter times to evacuate and the fact that more areas are prone to early flooding now than they were even 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago? And when will your community take the lead in raising the roadways so it gives your citizens more time to evacuate? A 1 to 3 foot raise in the elevation of an escape route could give 8 to 10 hours more time to evacuate. That means thousands of people can leave that maybe won't be able to leave in a shorter time. So this is what a max storm surge, when I say max, I mean a perfectly formed hurricane approaching Sarasota from the perfect direction at high tide would look like in Sarasota. This is the south part of Longboat Key, the north part of Siesta Key, Lido Key, Bird Key, and the bayfront in Sarasota, and the estuaries as we move up the coastline. The areas in red are 9 feet of water, 9 feet. This is not a Category 3 storm. It's not considered a major hurricane. But if we get the perfect storm here in Sarasota at Category 2, this is what the worst case scenario looks like. I'm showing you that because not all Category 2 storms are the same, and Category 2 storms will happen frequently. So this is not a major hurricane, but it's going to have major impact in our area if we aren't prepared. And this will surprise people because they don't think this kind of thing could happen in a Category 2. But I'm here to tell you today, this can happen. I'm not saying it will happen this year, but I think this is what we are looking at. This is what we have to be prepared for. So now I want to talk about sargassum because I've had more questions about sargassum, sarcastic questions maybe, than I have had about hurricanes in the last couple of weeks. But it's a seaweed and it's a brown algae, and it's algae like red tide. And it is fed by nutrient-rich water coming off of the rivers into the water, into the oceans, Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico. And the largest of those is the Amazon River Basin. And I'm sure all of you know that in the Amazon River Basin, a lot of that rainforest has been cut down to plant crops. And that land is very, very rich for a year or two and grows great crops. But after that, it has to be heavily fertilized because the soil is so thin in that cut down rainforest area. And so all of those nutrients then flow down the Amazon River into the Atlantic, and it feeds the seaweed growth, the sargassum seaweed growth. And it also is the warming oceans, which are very conducive to sargassum growth. Sargassum really is a floater. It floats on the sea surface. So it isn't like some seaweeds tethered to the ocean bottom, but it floats on the sea surface because it has air pods in it. And it actually is photosynthetic. So when light hits it, that also tends to make it grow. And it loves CO2. It feeds off CO2. So with the more carbon in the atmosphere due to the industrial nature of the world's manufacturing and transportation and agricultural systems, it actually is a something that, like lots of plants, like CO2, and so does sargassum. Since it's a floater, it moves on the wind. And when it piles up on the beaches, as you can see here in Central America, it can pile up 6 feet deep. And when the sun hits it, it rapidly decomposes, and it produces hydrogen sulfide gas, which is the rotten egg smell you will smell if we get that. And of course, that irritates your eyes, nose, and throat. But it's not toxic like a red tide is, but it's still more than aggravating. So this is what it looks like right now. This is a satellite picture of where the sargassum is. And man, it has exploded this year all the way from the African coast all the way into the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see it near the Bahamas there. And it's coming up into the Gulf of Mexico now. And it's since we started measuring this very carefully in the early 2000s, it's the biggest float of sargassum we've ever seen. So I want to superimpose on that. This is the hurricane path in June. Hurricanes come up from the Yucatan into the Gulf of Mexico through the Florida Straits, and that green area is the most favorable area for hurricane development in June. And so if a hurricane comes up that area, it's going to push the sargassum into the Gulf of Mexico. So that will exacerbate our chances of having a major sargassum pile up on the shores on the west coast of Florida. And I want to show you this because this is the map, just a few days old, of the sea surface temperatures. Those red blobs are the hot water, but also imposed on that are the movement of the currents. And those little arrows are the currents that go along with those hot waters. And you can see where the water is hot. And the blue arrow I drew is the trajectory of the water from the South Caribbean into the Gulf. And that is what's going on right now. And that's tending to bring the sargassum into the Gulf of Mexico. So that blob in the Gulf is the loop current. And you can see that's a pool of hot water where, you know, hurricane goes over that or a storm goes over that, it's going to go through intensification as it goes over that hot water, because hot water is like rocket fuel for hurricanes. So the East Florida coastline is the most susceptible, then the northern Gulf Coast, and then the west coast of Florida has a smaller chance. And we do know that climate warming is making sargassum more of a problem. It's not all bad though, because sargassum provides a habitat for these various, you know, birds, turtles, crabs, and fish. And it occurs naturally like red tide, but it's enhanced by climate warming, just like red tide and just like hurricanes. So human-induced nutrient flows are really exacerbating these algae blooms. And it's also a natural sink for CO2 because it loves CO2, so it's actually sequestering carbon. The more carbon in the atmosphere, the more sargassum. The sargassum is taking up that CO2. So here's the bottom line. You got to have a plan. You got to know your elevation. You got to know where you're going now. Maybe it's a good thing that Sarasota's building more hotels because there's more rooms that you can evacuate to. You have to be ready. Don't get ready when a storm is coming. Know when a storm is coming and be ready now. Have your plan. If you live on a barrier island, know where you're going to go. Are you going to leave your cars in the garage and have them destroyed? You know, in Florida, 350,000 cars were seriously damaged or destroyed in Hurricane Ian. That seems like a preventable loss if we have a plan for where we're going to bring these. You have to drive your car to get off the barrier islands, bring them and park them safely someplace, know where that's going to be. We're going to replay this on our YouTube channel as soon as we can get it up. We're also going to have an article on the website at 1 o'clock today. And now we're going to move to questions. Amy, can you tell me what some of these questions are? Unmute, mute.
Okay. Do we expect more African dust?
So do we expect more African dust this year? The answer is there will be some. I do not expect the African dust to be as dense as last year or as long-lived. So that's one of the reasons why I think we'll have a more distributed hurricane season this year than we did last year, even though wind shear is going to be worse in the hurricane peak season. I think we'll have more of a hurricane season early and evenly distributed because African dust, I don't think will be as favorable this year as it was last year to lower hurricanes, but the other factors are sort of making up for it.
Can you repeat how many storms?
So to repeat, there will be 14, our forecast, you know, our crystal ball is 14 storms, 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 2 or 3 will become category 3 to 5 hurricanes. And of course, the bottom line is it only takes one. And so with the Gulf as warm as it is, I think the threat area this year a storm that gets into the Gulf is going to be a problem.
Why did Charlie and Ian veer east of the forecast track at Charlotte Harbor?
So this is a very interesting question that you're asking about. Why did the Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Ian veer to the east just as they were striking the coast? And I'm going to tell you the Bob Bunting answer. And I can't guarantee you that this is 100% true, because the research on this is going to take years to complete. But the coastline, when an eye wall, that is the area right around the eye, gets onto the coastline, what happens is the land anchors the hurricane in some way. There's a frictional aspect of when something moving hits the land, and it sort of anchors the eye, and an eye that is coming ashore is going to veer to the left because of that frictional effect. Both Charlie and Ian did that when the eye wall hit the shore. Charlie was faster moving, doubly fast. Ian was moving half as fast, and it veered a little bit more from that friction, and it had a much bigger eye, so it veered a little quicker. And also another aspect is we had an eye wall replacement cycle in that eye just offshore that made the eye expand from about 12 miles to 30 miles wide. I mean, what an event. It was really one of the most catastrophic things that could ever possibly happen. And this is the signature I think we're going to be seeing in a climate warmed world, and Florida being a peninsula, I think maybe the longest peninsula in the world, with two huge tropical water masses off each coast, is certainly, we've got to be on our game if we're going to protect our lifestyle. I'm not suggesting that we should all flee. I'm suggesting we should be ready, and we should do smart development that lowers the risk of the damage and the life loss that we could have by using our carbon brain to make the decisions.
Okay. Will there be a new category 6?
Will there be a new category 6? Well, you noticed 185 was the highest I went on our wind. That was 1,400 times the damage of a category 1. It's possible that by 2050, there could be a category 6 storm. And that would be sustained winds in a hurricane that is in the 200-mile-an-hour area. So that's a EF4 tornado on the ground. That's big. So it's possible. We'll have to see. It would not surprise me.
Okay, one more climate. How would you compare climate risk in Florida with the other states in the north and west, which are getting blasted by the floods and tornadoes?
Here's the question: how would I categorize the risk in Florida versus other areas in our country that are susceptible to droughts, floods, fires, and hurricanes? Well, so the answer is the Climate Adaptation Center is a local organization, if you will, Southwest Florida, because the climate threats we face in Florida are different than the climate threats we face in other areas, and we're focusing on our climate threat. And every region has climate threats. New York City has got some big problems. Washington, D.C. big problems with sea level rise. Boston, big problems with sea level rise. The Gulf Coast, major hurricanes. The West Coast, forest fires. The central part of the United States, increasing tornado activity. And we're going to have another mega tornado outbreak tomorrow in the Midwest. The United States is, if you will, the only country that has the kind of water surrounding it, tropical water, that brings, and no mountains in the center of the continent, that allows for the advection or movement of warm, moist air into the center of the country and cold, dry air from the western part of the country that spins up these severe thunderstorms and tornadoes and associated floods and et cetera. So what I want to say is the risk from climate warming for our country is probably worse than any other country in the world, but we are the most affluent country and the best able to mitigate that risk. And that's what the Climate Center is all about. The CAC is about lowering the risk. There's two ways to do that. One is by adaptation, and then we have to speed our way to mitigation and lowering the carbon footprint here in our community in Florida, eventually in the United States and in the world, to lower the rate of climate warming and then get this thing back in the normal range over a period of 100 years in the future. Can it be done? Yes, it can. Will we do it? I don't know. But I can tell you this, I'm optimistic or I would not be doing this. And I need your optimism and your help to make what we're doing at the Climate Center a factor in decision-making here. Don't sit on your hands. In the United States, climate is the second, according to the polls, most important thing on voters' minds, and yet it only gets 2% of the funding and philanthropy. We need 10% to do a good job. So I hope we'll use that little QR code up there on the image you're seeing. Go to our website. From there, you can find making a donation. You can buy a ticket for the CAC Climate Champions Awards. You can read our articles. You can subscribe to our newsletter. There's a lot you can do to be part of this. Amy,
We're moving on to sargassum.
okay, now we're moving on to sargassum.
So we have a couple questions. Can the whole massive be chopped up out at sea and sink to the bottom? The other is, can it be used to processed into animal feed or fertilizer? And the third is, since it's so big and it blocks the sun from the water, could it potentially cool the water?
So the first answer is, can we sink it to the bottom of the ocean? And, you know, I think there's a misnomer out there in the news media. It's not a continuous blob. It is a sort of patchy blobs, small blobs of, you know, can cover quite a large area, but it would be very difficult to scale it from a point of view of sinking it to the bottom of the ocean. So that's probably not an option. The second thing is when it gets onto the shoreline, can we harvest it in some way and use it for fertilizer on the land or other things? And the answer is yes, we can do that. In fact, sargassum, when it rots, actually can be spread as a fertilizer on the land. It also can be processed into biofuels because it's carbon. It has a lot of carbon in it. And so it can be processed into biofuels that are clean, energy efficient. But we're not, as of yet, thinking on those terms, but that's an option, and it's an option for the climate economy. The climate economy is doing the things that will help adaptation and mitigation and also help spur the economy by doing it. And there's an area where entrepreneurs could get involved, and we could literally have fleets out there harvesting sargassum as we do boats fishing to bring that ashore and process it and turn it into biofuels. And the last question, Amy, was what?
Can it potentially cool?
Oh, can it cool the ocean surface? Probably not, because the albedo of the brown sargassum is about the same as the sea surface, so it will absorb heat at roughly the same rate. Are there other questions? Okay, well, we've had a wonderful audience today. I thank you all for joining us, and I invite you to send Amy or me an email with what you thought about this. And also, if you want more information, if you would like to become part of the CAC, whatever it is you would like us to do, we're here to serve. We're really here for the community, and we're really here to spread the information that we do have so you know how to use it. Thanks so much for joining us, and I wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for the clapping.
Great job, Bob.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I mean, sad, but awesome.
What did you have to say about the sargassum?
Oh, no. Okay, what time is it? 12:01. Wow, we were within a minute. Fabulous. Okay, I'm going to unmute just in case anybody else wants to talk. If anybody is still on, I'm still on for a few more minutes. If you have any questions you want to ask me directly, feel free to do that.
When is a copy of this video going to be put on YouTube? I came in really late.
Oh, hi, Lynn. Yes. You know, it's an hour-long video. It takes a while to process, but I would say sometime tomorrow. But if you're signed up for the newsletter, then I will send out a special announcement that it's available.
And how do I sign up for the newsletter?
So when you go to the climateadaptationcenter.org and read an article, at the bottom, it will say subscribe. And what that means is subscribe to the newsletter. You put your address, your email address, and from now on, you'll get our announcements, our newsletters. And of course, one of the announcements, the next announcement will be that the video is available on our YouTube channel.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Lynn, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, this is my first time. I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you too. That's why we're doing it. We want more people to know, and we want more people to get this information and spread the word as much as you can about it.
Right.
Thank you.
Hey, Bob.
Thank you.
It's Richard Rosen.
Yeah, Richard.
Thank you so much. That was really excellent. I really learned a lot. To maybe save my 5 foot above sea level home in Harbor Acres. Unbelievable.
Well,
Anyway,
I want you to be amongst the first to have a room off the.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to share with you. I apologize. Since we last spoke, the month of March is basically a write-off. I've been the sicker I've ever been with COVID, and then retesting, and then another 10, 12 days after that. So it's been just whatever. Anyway, I wanted to regroup when you have time, you and Amy. I know you're totally busy. I'll be starting to help again to try to sell some tickets. And I just wanted to say thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Rich. And whenever you're ready, we'll be ready.
Okay, good. All right. We'll talk soon. Thank
And
you.
I'm glad you're feeling better. Did your son have it as well?
He has been the head of massive long haul for 2 years. He's
Oh
doing
my
much.
God.
No, it's who knows? Listen, I dodged the bullet. 3 years, 5 shots, and I finally, blew it. I don't know what happened, but
Well,
I got it.
as a scientist, I just want to say you're more bulletproof than you were.
Right. Yes. Yes. It's now the cough, and now that just feeling really weak. But the lungs are clear and my heart's good, so I'm on the way to see the tunnel. So thank you. All right.
Thanks, Rich. And
Thank
feel
We'll talk
better.
soon.
Look forward to
Thank
seeing you.
Thank you. Good.
Bye.
Bye.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm signing off. I'm getting lots of compliments. But Steve, excellent delivery.
Who did?
Steve Sabato, he knows what it,